I have polished silver at Hathermere Hall for 11 years, and in all that time I have never seen the lords at the long table fall silent at once. Not when the Earl of Devizes spilled claret on the Marchioness's sleeve. Not when the hunting dogs got into the dining room and upended the gravy boat. Not even when the old Duke, God rest him, stood at Christmas dinner and announced that he was giving the South Meadow to the church. There was always muttering, always a cough, always one man who kept eating no matter what. But on the evening the Dowager Duchess curtsied to a kitchen maid, every fork stopped moving, every glass paused halfway to every mouth, and the only sound in that room was the candle flames bending in the draught. My name is William Cole. I am a footman, not the first footman, not the under-butler, just a footman. And I have no business telling this story, except that I was there, and I saw it, and I believe someone ought to tell it the way it happened, not the way the county decided to remember it. It began with the hiring. The Duke of Hathermere, the present Duke, the old Duke's son, whom the household calls His Grace, and the county calls the proud Duke, though I have never seen him do a proud thing that was not earned, needed a new kitchen maid. The last one had married a farrier in the village and left with our blessing and a set of good knives. Mrs. Payne, the cook, put the word out, and a girl arrived from somewhere south of Gloucester with a letter from a clergyman and nothing else. Her name was Ruth. She was small and dark-haired and quiet in the way that people are quiet when they have learned that speaking earns them nothing. She worked. That was the first thing anyone noticed. She worked the way water runs downhill, steadily and without complaint, from dawn until the kitchen fires were banked. She scrubbed the pots and swept the hearths and carried the heavy trays up the back stairs without being asked, and she never once sat in the servants' hall when there was something that still needed doing. Mrs. Payne approved of her, which was rare. Mrs. Payne approved of almost no one. She has hands, Mrs. Payne said to me one evening, as though that explained everything. When I looked confused, she added, clever hands. She learns a thing once and does it right the second time. I have been cooking for 40 years and I can count on one hand the girls who could do that. Ruth did not speak much. She was polite. Yes, sir. No, ma'am. Thank you, Mrs. Payne. But she did not volunteer herself. She ate her meals at the end of the kitchen table, always the last to sit and the first to rise. And she did not gossip and she did not sing, and she did not flirt with the grooms. And the rest of the kitchen staff treated her with the wary respect people reserve for someone who works harder than they do and never mentions it. I liked her. I liked her from the first week, when I found her in the still room at midnight, straining something through muslin into a stone jar. She startled when she saw me. I am making a tincture, she said, for Mrs. Payne's hands. She will not ask the doctor, and the joints are worse in the damp. She had not been asked to do this. No one knew she could. Where did you learn? I said. My mother, she said, and then she pressed her lips together in a way that told me the subject was closed, and I did not press. But I watched her after that, the way she noticed things, the way she moved through the house, like someone reading a room before she entered it, the way she anticipated what was needed before anyone asked. She was not simply a kitchen maid. She was something more, something she was keeping carefully hidden, and I could not have told you what it was. The Dowager Duchess arrived at Hathermere in October, as she did every year, to spend the autumn with her son. Lady Marguerite was 73 years old, small and silver-haired, and possessed of a dignity so absolute that grown men straightened their cravats when she entered a room. She had been the old Duke's wife for 40 years. She had buried him with her back straight and her eyes dry, and she had spent the decades since then running her dower house with the same iron efficiency with which she had once run the main estate. She was not warm, not in the way people mean when they say warm. She did not embrace you or tell you that you mattered. She simply treated you with the exact degree of respect you had earned, no more and no less. And if you had earned a great deal, her respect felt like standing in sunlight. The household prepared for her visit the way armies prepare for inspection. Every surface polished, every fire laid perfectly, every meal planned to her precise specifications. Ruth was assigned to carry the Dowager's evening tea tray, a task that required climbing 3 flights of stairs and presenting the tray without a rattle. And I could see the anxiety in the set of her shoulders as she practiced the route. "She is just an old woman," I told her. "She is the Dowager Duchess," Ruth said, as though that were a different species entirely. On the first evening, Ruth carried the tray up and came back down and said nothing. On the second evening, she carried the tray up and came back down after 20 minutes, which was unusual. The tray was normally set down, and the maid dismissed in 2. On the third evening, she was gone for an hour. Mrs. Payne sent me to investigate. I climbed the stairs to the Dowager's sitting room and stopped outside the door, which was ajar, and I heard Lady Marguerite's voice. Not the clipped, formal voice of the Dowager, but a softer voice. A voice I had not heard from her in 11 years, saying, "The lavender in the tisane. Where did you learn to blend it that way?" And Ruth's voice, low and careful, "My mother, Your Grace. She kept a still room. She taught me the proportions when I was very young. Your mother had training." A pause. "Thus she did, Your Grace." "What training?" A longer pause. "She was, before she married, she was in service to a great house. She was the herbalist. The still room was her domain." "Which house?" Silence. Then, very quietly, "Alderton." I heard the Dowager's teacup meet its saucer with a sound like a struck bell. "Alderton," Lady Marguerite repeated. "The Alderton still room. I knew the woman who ran it. I knew her very well. Her name was Mary Graves." Ruth said nothing. "She married a farmer's son," the Dowager continued, her voice strange and tight. "She married beneath her, the world said, and they were wrong, because she loved him and he was good to her. She left service and disappeared into the countryside, and I lost her. I wrote letters. They were returned. I was told she had died. She did die," Ruth said. "3 years ago. The fever. And you are her daughter." "Yes." The silence that followed was the kind that changes the air in a room. I stood in the corridor, and I did not move, and I did not breathe. "Your mother," Lady Marguerite said, "was the finest woman I ever knew. She taught me how to manage a still room. She taught me how to keep a house. She sat with me the night my first child died, and she held my hand, and she did not say a single word, because she understood that some griefs are beyond words. I have carried that with me for 50 years. Another silence, then Ruth's voice, so small it barely existed. "She spoke of you. She called you Lady M. She said you were the bravest woman she had ever met." I heard a chair move. I heard footsteps, slow, careful footsteps, the footsteps of a woman who has not moved quickly in a decade. And then I heard something I would not have believed if I had not been standing 3 feet from the door. Lady Marguerite, the Dowager Duchess of Hathermere, wept. After that evening, things changed. Ruth still carried the tray, but she stayed longer each night, an hour, sometimes 2. The Dowager began requesting specific tisanes, specific blends, specific preparations that required Ruth's particular knowledge. She asked Ruth to sit. She asked Ruth about her mother. She asked Ruth about the still room remedies, the herb gardens, the old ways of keeping a house healthy that had been forgotten by modern physicians and their fashionable powders. Ruth bloomed. There is no other word for it. The quiet, careful, hidden woman I had watched scrub pots and carry trays began to speak. Not loudly, not grandly, but with a steady authority that came from somewhere deep, from a knowledge passed down through careful hands and a mother's patient instruction. She knew things. She knew which herbs eased inflammation and which settled a restless stomach, and which, steeped in the right proportions, could bring sleep to an old woman whose joints ached so badly she had not slept through the night in years. The Duke noticed. He was not a man who missed things. He was the proud Duke, not vain, but exacting. The kind of man who knew the name of every tenant, and the yield of every field, and the state of every chimney on his estate. He noticed that his mother was sleeping better. He noticed that Mrs. Payne's hands had improved. He noticed that the kitchen had become, under Ruth's quiet influence, a place of competence and calm. He asked Mrs. Payne about it. Mrs. Payne told him about the tinctures, the tisanes, the remedies. He asked his mother about it. His mother said, "The girl is Mary Graves's daughter. She has her mother's gift." "Who is Mary Graves?" he asked. And Lady Marguerite told him. about the woman who had been her dearest companion in youth, who had taught her the running of a household, who had sat with her through the worst night of her life and held her hand in silence. She told him that she had spent 50 years believing this woman was dead, and that her daughter had appeared in her kitchen like an answer to a prayer she had stopped saying. The Duke was quiet for a long time. The supper was on the 29th of October. The Duke had invited the county, 3 lords and their wives, the bishop, the magistrate, a handful of titled neighbors who gathered at Hathermere every autumn for the shooting and stayed for the Dowager's famous table. 12 at dinner, plus the Duke and his mother. I was serving, as I always did. Wine on the right, dishes from the left, invisible and attentive. Ruth was not at the table, of course. She was in the kitchen, where kitchen maids belonged. But halfway through the second course, Lady Marguerite set down her fork and said, in her clear, carrying voice, "I should like Ruth to join us." The table stirred. The Duke looked at his mother. Mrs. Payne, standing in the passage, looked at me. I looked at the ceiling. "Mother," the Duke said carefully, "I am 73 years old." Lady Marguerite said, "I have earned the right to seat my table as I wish. Fetch her." The Duke nodded to me. I went to the kitchen and found Ruth elbow-deep in flour, her apron dusted white, her hair escaping its cap. I told her. She went very pale. "I cannot," she said. "The Dowager Duchess has asked for you," I said. "You can." She removed her apron. She smoothed her dress, the plain gray dress of a kitchen maid, clean, but patched at the elbows. She pushed her hair back behind her ears. She looked at me with those steady, frightened eyes and said, "William, I am not dressed for this." "You are dressed exactly as you are," I said. "That is enough." She walked into the dining room. 12 faces turned. The lords and their wives saw a kitchen maid in a plain gray dress, flowers still faintly visible on her cuffs, standing in the doorway of one of the finest dining rooms in England. I saw the judgment pass across their faces, the raised eyebrows, the tightened mouths, the quick glances exchanged between people who are too polite to speak their disdain aloud, but not too polite to think it. Lady Marguerite rose from her chair. She rose slowly. She was 73, and her joints were not kind, but she rose, and she stood, and she looked at Ruth standing in that doorway, and then the Dowager Duchess of Hathermere did something that no one at that table had ever seen her do for anyone. Not for the bishop, not for the earl, not for the Duke himself. She curtsied. Not a nod, not a tilt of the head. A full, deliberate curtsy, as low as her old knees would take her, to a kitchen maid in a gray dress with flower on her cuffs. Every lord stopped speaking. Every fork halted. Every glass paused. The Earl of Devizes, who had been raising a piece of pheasant to his mouth, set it down and stared. The bishop's wife put her hand over her heart. The Duke sat very still in his chair at the head of the table, and I watched his face, and I saw the moment he understood what his mother was doing. Not merely honoring a servant, but honoring a debt, a friendship, a loyalty that had outlived death and distance, and 50 years of silence. "This young woman," Lady Marguerite said, straightening with the dignity of a woman who has never in her life done anything by accident, "is the daughter of the finest friend I ever had. Her mother taught me everything I know about running a house and keeping a family. She sat with me through the worst night of my life and asked for nothing in return. I lost her, and I have grieved her every day since. And now her daughter is here, in my son's kitchen, scrubbing pots, and I will not sit at this table and pretend that she is less than she is." She turned to Ruth. "Sit beside me," she said. Ruth sat. Her hands were trembling. The chair the footman pulled out for her was between the Dowager Duchess and the bishop, and she sat in it with the straight-backed composure of a woman who has no idea how she arrived where she is, but has decided, with a quiet fierceness, that she will not be ashamed. The Duke looked at her across the table. I was close enough to see his expression, and what I saw was not pity, not surprise, not the amused condescension of a man watching his mother's eccentricity. It was the look of a man who is seeing someone clearly for the first time, seeing past the gray dress and the flower and the silence, and who recognizes, in what he sees, something he has been looking for without knowing it. "Miss Ruth," he said, I believe you know more about this house than anyone at this table, myself included. She looked at him. I know the still room, your grace, and the kitchen garden, and which herbs will ease your mother's hands. You know a great deal more than that, he said, and I should like to learn it. The Earl of Devizes cleared his throat and resumed eating. The table followed. Conversation returned. But something had shifted. Something in the room, in the house, in the way the Duke looked at the quiet woman his mother had seated beside her. And nothing at Hathermere was quite the same after that. Ruth did not return to the kitchen that evening, or any evening after. The Dowager installed her in the rooms beside her own and declared her a companion. But companion is a word that means many things, and what Ruth became was something closer to a daughter, or a legacy, or the living proof that a friendship between two women half a century ago could reach across death and silence and loss and still bear fruit. The Duke courted her. He did it properly, slowly, carefully, with the meticulous attention of a man who understands that this woman has been overlooked by the world, and who intends, with great deliberation, to ensure she is never overlooked again. He walked with her in the kitchen garden. He asked her to advise on the tenant's health. He brought her into the library and showed her the estate records and listened when she pointed out things his steward had missed. When he proposed, he did not do it in a drawing room or a ballroom. He did it in the still room, the small, warm, herb-scented room where Ruth had made the first tincture for Mrs. Payne's hands, where her mother's knowledge lived on in every jar and bottle. And he said, "Your mother and mine were the best of friends. I should like us to be more than that." She said yes. And Lady Marguerite, who was listening at the door because she was 73 and had earned the right to eavesdrop, wept for the second time in her life and declared it the finest match in England. I was at the wedding. I stood in the back of the chapel in my best coat, the one I wear for Christmas and funerals and the occasions that matter, and I watched a kitchen maid in a white dress walk toward the Duke of Hathermere, and I thought, the world is full of women like Ruth, women who work and wait and keep their gifts hidden because no one has ever thought to ask what they carry. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, someone curtsies, and the room goes quiet, and the hidden thing is seen at last. The Dowager Duchess curtsied to a maid at supper. Every lord stopped speaking, and not one of them had sense enough to understand why.